They say first impressions are everything. But what happens when someone makes the wrong one? A woman walks into a high-ended real estate office expecting professionalism but instead finds herself facing pure arrogance and dismissal. But just when the situation seems set in stone, an unexpected phone call flips everything upside down. What happens next will leave you speechless. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments section below. Have you ever been underestimated before? Simone Carter walked into Langley & Associates with the quiet confidence of a woman who knew her worth. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't arrogant, and she certainly wasn't looking for validation. She had spent years building her business from the ground up. Long nights, hard lessons, and an unshakable drive had gotten her here. But as soon as she stepped inside the marble-floored office, she felt it, the unspoken shift in energy. The quick, appraising glance from the receptionist, the way people subtly glanced at her, then looked away as if they had already made up their minds. She approached the front desk, offering a polite smile. "Good afternoon. I have an appointment with Victoria Langley." The receptionist, a young woman with sleek blonde hair and an expression carefully crafted to appear neutral, hesitated. "Your name?" "Simone Carter." There was a pause. The receptionist's eyes flickered with something, curiosity, doubt, before she nodded and picked up the phone. "One moment." Simone waited, hands relaxed at her sides, but she was already sensing how this was going to go. She had dealt with this energy before. It was the same quiet condescension she had faced when she first walked into corporate boardrooms. The same look she got when she pulled up to valet parking in a car they didn't expect her to drive. It was always the same, and she had learned to let it roll off her shoulders. The receptionist muttered into the phone, then looked back up. "Mrs. Langley will be with you shortly. You can have a seat." Simone nodded, choosing to stand instead. She casually glanced around the office. Sleek modern decor framed pictures of high profitable clients and an overwhelming sense of exclusivity. This wasn't just a real estate firm, it was a status symbol. They didn't just sell homes, they sold a lifestyle, a validation of wealth, a promise of belonging to an elite class. A tall, immaculately dressed woman stepped out from the glass-walled office at the back. Victoria Langley, with her signature tailored dress and razor-sharp bob, moved with the ease of someone who considered herself untouchable. She scanned the waiting area, her eyes landing on Simone. Her expression barely shifted, but Simone saw it, the flicker of confusion, the almost imperceptible narrowing of her eyes. Victoria walked over, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "Miss Carter?" Simone smiled, extending her hand. "That's me. Nice to meet you." Victoria hesitated before shaking her hand, her grip brief and impersonal. "I wasn't expecting you." Simone raised an eyebrow. "Is that a problem?" "Well, shush." "No, of course not." Victoria's smile was tight, practiced. "Please, come with me." Simone followed her into the private office, watching as Victoria smoothed her dress and took a seat behind her oversized desk. She gestured to the chair across from her, and Simone sat, crossing her legs casually. "So," Victoria began, folding her hands together, "how can I help you?" Simone didn't miss the undertone. Not what property are you interested in, not what are you looking for, just a vague, polite version of why are you here. "I'm looking to purchase a property," Simone said smoothly. "I saw the listing for the estate on Willow Ridge and I'd like to make an offer." Victoria blinked. The estate on Willow Ridge was one of the most expensive listings on the market, an ultra-modern home in one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. "Oh," she said, her voice a little too surprised. "I see." Simone tilted her head, waiting. Victoria cleared her throat, reaching for a folder. "Well, that property is quite significant. It's a multi-million-dollar listing, and the clientele we typically deal with." She stopped herself, smiling a little too sweetly. "Forgive me, I just like to ensure that our clients are fully aware of what they're considering before we proceed. Simone's lips twitched, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm aware. Victoria gave a slow nod. I see. Have you looked at other properties in the area? Perhaps something a bit more suited to first-time buyers? Simone leaned back in her chair. I'm not a first-time buyer. Oh, Victoria's smile faltered just slightly. Wonderful. Well, I'd be happy to discuss financing options with you if you'd like. Many of our buyers work with financial advisors to... Simone let out a soft chuckle. I won't need financing. I'll be paying in cash. There it was, the shift, the flicker of disbelief, quickly masked by forced composure. Victoria recovered quickly, but now she was watching Simone like she was trying to solve a puzzle. That's lovely. Of course, we would still need to verify certain. Then, the phone rang. Victoria glanced at the screen, sighing. Excuse me for just a moment, she answered, her voice slipping into the smooth, professional tone she reserved for important clients. Victoria Langley speaking. Simone watched as Victoria's expression changed. At first it was just polite neutrality, then a flicker of recognition, then panic. Yes, Victoria said quickly. Yes, of course, I understand. No, I wasn't aware. Oh, a stiff pause. Oh, I see. Her face had gone pale. Her fingers tightened around the phone as she listened, her breath catching slightly. Simone remained still, waiting, an amused glint in her eye. Victoria swallowed. Yes, I'll take care of it immediately. My apologies. She hung up slowly, as if her brain was still trying to process what just happened. Simone smiled. Everything all right? Victoria forced a stiff nod, but her demeanor had completely shifted. The confidence, the arrogance. It was unraveling, and Simone knew why. This was going to be interesting. Victoria sat frozen for a moment, gripping the phone like it had personally betrayed her. Simone watched, her expression calm, but the gleam in her eyes was unmistakable. She knew whatever had just happened on that call had rattled Victoria to her core. Clearing her throat, Victoria attempted to regain her composure. I apologize for that interruption, she said, forcing a tight smile. Simone crossed one leg over the other, completely unbothered. No worries, you seemed a little shaken up, though. Victoria straightened in her chair, adjusting the papers in front of her to stall. It was just unexpected. But let's return to our discussion. Simone raised an eyebrow, waiting. Victoria hesitated before finally sighing. Miss Carter, I want to be upfront with you. The property on Willow Ridge, it's an extremely competitive listing. We've had several interested buyers. Simone tilted her head. Oh, I'm sure. But I wasn't under the impression that this was an auction. It's listed, which means it's available. Unless, of course, it's already been sold. Victoria flinched slightly. No, it hasn't been sold. But then I'd like to move forward with my offer. Simone leaned forward just slightly. Unless there's a reason you don't want to sell it to me. Victoria's lips pressed together in a thin line. That's not what I'm saying. No, because it feels like it. Simone's voice was calm, steady, but there was an unmistakable authority in it now. I walked in here with an appointment, prepared to make a serious offer on a property you're responsible for selling. But instead of treating me like a buyer, you treated me like an inconvenience. Victoria opened her mouth, but Simone wasn't finished. I've dealt with people like you before, Simone continued smoothly. You like to think you have the power, that you decide who belongs in certain spaces, but that's where you're mistaken. She smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile that made people nervous. See, Victoria, I don't need your validation. You don't control who has money. You don't control who gets to live in that neighborhood, and you certainly don't get to decide if I'm worthy of buying a home." Victoria's face burned red. "That's not what I meant." "Oh, but it is," Simone said, her voice dropping just slightly. "You just didn't expect to get caught." Victoria exhaled sharply, pushing her chair back slightly as if she needed more space between them. "Miss Carter, I apologize if you misunderstood my intentions. I assure you, we treat all of our clients with the utmost professionalism." Simone let out a short laugh. "That's a nice, company-approved statement, but it's also complete garbage. If that were true, you wouldn't have dismissed me the second I walked through that door." Victoria clenched her jaw, but before she could say anything, the phone rang again. She snatched it up without thinking. "This is Victoria Langley," she answered quickly. Simone observed as Victoria's expression shifted once more. Only this time it wasn't just unease. It was fear. "Yes," Victoria said, her voice noticeably softer now. I understand." A long pause. "Of course. Yes, I'll make sure it's handled immediately." She hung up, setting the phone down like it was a ticking bomb. Simone smirked. "That call wasn't about another buyer, was it?" Victoria hesitated before shaking her head. "No." Simone adjusted her blazer. "I'm going to take a wild guess here that was someone important?" Victoria didn't respond. Simone smiled. "Let me make it easier for you. That call was from someone who just reminded you that I'm not the one you should be dismissing." A tense silence hung in the air. Simone leaned forward slightly. "Victoria, let me explain something to you. There's a reason I don't need financing for this purchase. There's a reason I walked in here today instead of sending someone else to do it for me. I like to see firsthand how people operate." Victoria swallowed, her shoulders stiff. Simone tapped her nails against the armrest of her chair. "I own multiple businesses, but real estate is one of my passions. I buy properties, I develop them, and I turn them into places that people like me, successful black professionals, can live in without people like you questioning whether they belong." She let that sink in for a moment. "Now, what do you think happens when I have an experience like this?" Victoria's eyes darted toward the door as if looking for an escape. "Miss Carter, Simone didn't let her finish. "I tell you what happens," Simone continued. "I make a call, just like the one you just got. Only my call won't be about one house. My call will be about you." Victoria's lips parted slightly. "You think you're at the top because you sell luxury homes to wealthy clients," Simone mused. "But the truth is, your exclusive clientele only exists because people like me let you be in the room." Victoria's breath hitched. Simone let the silence stretch, watching the weight of her words settle over the woman in front of her. Then, finally, she stood. "I'll have my legal team handle the paperwork," she said, adjusting her bag. "You'll hear from them by the end of the day." Victoria blinked rapidly, nodding too quickly. "Yes, of course." Simone walked to the door, pausing just before stepping out. "Oh, and Victoria—" The woman looked up, eyes wide. Simone smiled. "Next time, think twice before you assume who can't afford something." Then she walked out, leaving Victoria sitting behind her desk, pale, shaken, and completely aware that she had just made the biggest mistake of her career. Victoria Langley sat motionless at her desk long after Simone Carter had walked out of her office. The room, once a place where she had felt untouchable, now felt suffocating. The weight of her mistake was pressing down on her chest, squeezing her lungs like a vice. She knew she had underestimated Simone. She knew she had let her arrogance blind her. But most of all, she knew that phone call had confirmed what she feared. Simone Carter wasn't just a potential buyer. She was someone powerful. The moment Simone had left, Victoria grabbed her phone and scrolled through her contacts, her fingers trembling slightly. She needed answers. She needed to get ahead of this before it was too late. Just as she was about to make a call, her office door swung open. Victoria. It was him. James Whitmore, the firm's senior partner, strode into the room, his expression tight, his usually composed demeanor cracking at the edges. Victoria immediately stood, smoothing down her dress, her throat dry. "James," she started. "Sit," he ordered, his voice like steel. Victoria obeyed, lowering herself into the chair as James closed the door behind him. He was never one for public displays of anger, but she could see it in his clenched jaw and the way he exhaled sharply before speaking. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" he asked, his tone dangerously calm. Victoria swallowed. There was a misunderstanding. I didn't know who she was." James let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You didn't know who she was?" He shook his head in disbelief. "Victoria, do you ever do your research? Do you ever take a second to check before you make assumptions?" Victoria's fingers tightened on the armrests. "I didn't—" "You dismissed Simone Carter," James cut in, his voice rising slightly. "You disrespected her. You questioned whether she could afford one of our properties. And do you know what the worst part is?" He leaned over her desk, his voice dropping. "She's one of our firm's biggest investors." Victoria's breath caught in her throat. "But James let out another sharp laugh, running a hand through his graying hair. "You heard me. She doesn't just buy properties, Victoria. She funds them. She owns multiple real estate firms. She partners with people like me to develop luxury neighborhoods. And guess what? She has the power to decide who gets a seat at the table." Victoria's vision blurred for a moment. This couldn't be happening. "She called me," James continued, his eyes narrowing. "Do you know what she said?" Victoria shook her head, unable to find her voice. "She told me she's pulling her investment from our firm," James said, his voice deadly quiet. "And that means we are losing millions of dollars in funding, in projects, in partnerships. Because of you." The blood drained from Victoria's face. "And," she whispered. "She can't." "Oh, she can," James snapped, "and she did." Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Victoria felt her entire world crumble around her. Everything she had worked for, everything she had built, it was all hanging by a thread. "James," she said quickly, desperation creeping into her voice. "I can fix this. I'll call her. I'll apologize. James shook his head. "It's too late. She doesn't want an apology, Victoria. She doesn't need an apology. She made it clear. She only does business with people who respect their clients, no matter what they look like." He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. "She said she doesn't trust this firm anymore. And honestly, I don't blame her." Victoria felt like she was going to be sick. "James, please," she tried again. "I didn't mean—" "But you did mean it," James interrupted, his eyes cold. "That's the problem, Victoria. You didn't just slip up. You believed she didn't belong. And now, you don't belong here." Victoria's heart stopped. "What?" she whispered. James reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, setting it on the desk between them. "Consider this your notice. You're being let go." Her hands shook as she picked up the envelope. "No," she said, her voice breaking. "James, please. I've worked here for years. I've brought in clients. And you just cost us the biggest deal of the year," James said coldly. "You cost us our reputation. You cost me my patience." He straightened his tie and exhaled. "Clear out your desk by the end of the day." Victoria sat there, frozen, unable to process what was happening. James turned toward the door, but before he left, he paused. "One last thing," he said, his voice quieter now. "You could have handled this differently. You could have treated her with respect from the start, but instead you let your prejudice make a decision for you." He shook his head. "And now, you're paying for it." With that, he walked out, leaving Victoria alone in the office that was no longer hers. Simone Carter stepped into her car, closing the door behind her with an air of satisfaction. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts, pausing for a moment before dialing. A voice answered on the other end. She took the bait. Simone smirked. Hook, line, and sinker. Laughter echoed on the other end. "You're ruthless, Simone." "I don't waste my time with people who think they get to decide my worth," she replied coolly. "I gave her every chance to do the right thing. She made her choice." Her business partner hummed in agreement. "So what's next?" Simone leaned back in her seat, glancing at the office building through her rearview mirror. "Now," she said smoothly, "I buy the whole damn company." She ended the call and smiled. Victoria Langley had made her bed. Now she had to lie in it.